somewhere in the planning documents for Operation Chariot, held now at the Imperial War Museum in London. There's a line written by Commander Robert Ryder, the naval officer who led the raid. He wrote that the withdrawal plan was the part that troubled him most. Then he wrote, "There wasn't a good one." Then he signed off on the mission. What do you do with a plan you know has a hole in it? When the mission is necessary enough that the hole doesn't change the answer? 611 men, 18 vessels, a destroyer packed with 4¼ tons, nearly 9,500 pounds, of high explosive in her bow, 5 miles of fortified river, 8 kilometers of guns and searchlights, and a commander sitting in a room in England, writing in his private papers that he didn't know how to bring them home, and sending them anyway. I've read a lot of after-action reports. The language in them is usually clean. Operational necessity, acceptable loss, passive voice that puts distance between the decision and the consequence. Ryder didn't use that language. He just wrote that it troubled him. That one admission is what this story is actually about. Not the explosion, not the battleship that never reached the Atlantic, not the 5 Victoria Crosses. It's about what a man does when he knows the plan has a gap in it, and what the men who trusted him were willing to walk into. This is the St. Nazaire raid, March 28, 1942. By the end of this, I think you'll understand why Churchill called it the greatest raid of the war, and why that compliment costs more than it sounds. By early 1942, the Atlantic was killing Britain quietly. German U-boats were sinking Allied merchant ships faster than they could be replaced. Fuel, food, steel, medical supplies. The convoy routes were the lifeline, and they were being cut. Into that situation, place one more problem. The German battleship Tirpitz, 52,600 tons, 8 380mm guns, 15-inch main batteries, sitting in a Norwegian fjord, not firing a single shot, because she didn't need to. Her existence alone forced the Royal Navy to keep capital ships in the north watching her, which meant fewer escorts for the convoys already being shredded in the Atlantic. Churchill called her the Beast. She had one weakness, built into her size. If the Tirpitz took serious damage, one torpedo, one mine, she needed a dry dock capable of receiving a ship of her tonnage. Without one, any wound was permanent. She'd limp north and sit there. Finished. There was exactly one such dry dock on the entire Atlantic coast of occupied Europe. The Normandie Dock, Saint-Nazaire, France. 350 meters long, nearly 1,150 feet. The only facility that could keep a damaged Tirpitz in the fight, destroy it, and the beast was caged. And those convoys, already the margin between Britain staying in the war and running out of everything a country needs to keep fighting, had one less nightmare to survive. That's why 611 men were asked to do what they were asked to do, not for a dock, for everything that dock made possible. The RAF had already tried 60 raids. The outer caisson gate was reinforced concrete and steel, 35 feet thick at the base, over 10 meters of reinforced concrete. Bomber Command couldn't break it. So, combined operations designed something the Germans would never see coming, because no rational commander would send it. HMS Campbeltown, an old American destroyer, 20 years old, handed to Britain under Lend-Lease. Stripped down, her funnels cut to resemble a German torpedo boat. Her bow packed with 4¼ tons, nearly 9,500 pounds, of high explosive behind a concrete-lined casing and false bulkheads. Delayed fuses, set to trigger hours after impact. She would ram the dock gate at full speed. The crew would abandon ship. And then, when the Germans had started treating her like a prize, walking her decks, congratulating themselves, she'd take the dock with her. Commandos riding in wooden motor launches alongside would land. destroy the dock's pumping machinery and winding gear, and withdraw by sea. Except St. Nazaire sat 5 miles up the Loire estuary, 8 kilometers of fortified river, coastal artillery on both banks, flak batteries, searchlights every 200 meters, one every 220 yards along both banks. Over 5,000 German troops in and around the port. The motor launches had wooden hulls and aviation fuel tanks, with no armor between them and the guns. Ryder knew the withdrawal plan had a hole in it. He sent them anyway. Most of the men weren't told about the explosives in Campbeltown's bow until they were already at sea. Why, until England was behind them and France was ahead and the choice had already been made for them. I want you to think about what you do with that information when there's nowhere to go. You go below deck, you check your kit, you clean your weapon again, and you wait. The force left Falmouth on the evening of March 26, 1942. They sailed south first, then west, to mislead observers. A German U-boat spotted them mid-crossing, crash-dived before it could radio a warning. A patrol aircraft circled them in the afternoon, received captured recognition signals, and left. 2 pieces of luck. The kind you don't build a plan around. By midnight on the 27th, they were in the Loire estuary, 12 knots, no lights. German naval ensign flying from Campbeltown's mast. At 2200 hours, a shore battery challenged them by signal lamp. The flotilla's signalman replied in captured German codes. Damaged vessels returning from operations. Casualties aboard. Requesting immediate entry. It bought them 8 minutes. Then the searchlights came on. Every light in the harbor found them at once. And then the guns. 20-millimeter cannon. 37-millimeter flak. 40-millimeter Bofors. 1.5-inch rapid-fire guns. From fortified positions on both banks. The motor launches had no armor. Plywood and petrol. When a shell found a fuel tank, the boat didn't sink. It became a torch. Men on neighboring vessels watched and kept moving because stopping meant dying where they floated. HMS Campbeltown took over 50 direct hits in the final approach. She didn't slow down. Commander Stephen Beatty held course on the bridge. His helmsman was killed beside him. Another man took the wheel without being asked. The dock gate was visible in the searchlights, and 164 feet wide, 50 meters, 35 feet thick, over 10 meters of reinforced concrete and steel. 1,000 meters, just over 1,000 yards. 800, under 900 yards. 400, 440 yards. At 0134 hours, Campbeltown struck the outer caisson at 19 knots. The impact drove her bow 12 meters into the gate, nearly 40 feet of steel buried in reinforced concrete. The ship shuddered and settled, wedged so deep that no tide could pull her free. The fuses in her bow were now buried inside the dock gate, counting. The Commandos came off immediately, downscaling ladders into a harbor fully awake and fighting back. And demolition teams moved to pre-assigned targets, memorized from sand table models, built from reconnaissance photographs. They had rehearsed in the dark because they expected the dock lights to be shot out. The dock lights were not shot out. They worked in full illumination, under continuous fire. The pumping house, destroyed. The winding gear, blown. The impeller room, demolished. Every primary target hit, confirmed later by German engineering assessments captured after the war. They did the job because they had been trained to do it, and because the men beside them were doing it, and because that is what you do when the alternative is that the thing doesn't get done. Sergeant Thomas Durrant was on motor launch 306, manning an exposed gun position while the launch engaged a German torpedo boat at point-blank range. He was hit. Kept firing, hit again, kept firing, hit a third time, collapsed at the gun. The German commander who captured him formally requested Durrant receive the Victoria Cross, an enemy officer, making a case for an enemy soldier's decoration. Durrant died of his wounds. He received the VC posthumously. That moment, a German commander choosing to honor rather than simply process a defeated enemy, tells you something about the nature of what happened that night that the casualty figures don't. If you have family who served in the Commandos, or the Royal Navy in these years, drop it in the comments. That section has become something of an archive, and we read it. The extraction was dying. Of the 16 motor launches that entered the Loire, only 4 made it back to England. The rest were sunk, burning, or crewless. The commandos on the dock waited at their extraction points. The boats weren't coming. By 0330 hours, Newman gave the order. Disperse. Attempt overland escape to Spain, 450 kilometers, roughly 280 miles. South on foot, in battle dress, with whatever ammunition remained. None had civilian clothes. None spoke enough French to disappear. The Germans began rounding them up before dawn. The Germans spent the morning treating HMS Campbeltown like a trophy. Officers boarded her. Engineers examined the damage. Several hundred German personnel gathered in and around the dock, walking her decks, congratulating each other on repelling the British raid. Nobody found the explosives. The concrete casing had held through 50 hits, and the ramming itself. The fuses were still counting inside the dock gate. At 10:35 hours, Campbeltown detonated. The explosion destroyed the caisson completely, killed an estimated 360 German soldiers and naval personnel. The Normandie Dock flooded. The largest dry dock on the Atlantic coast ceased to exist as a working facility. It stayed that way until 1948. Here's what that meant forward in time, because significance doesn't stop at the moment of detonation. The Tirpitz never entered the Atlantic. Not once. The convoy routes barely surviving the spring of 1942 survived the summer. The supplies that crossed made the North Africa landings possible in November. The chain runs from one dock in France to the beaches of Algeria, to the opening of the Mediterranean, to the eventual invasion of Italy. You pull one thread and the whole fabric shifts. Some 617 Squadron finally sank the Tirpitz in a Norwegian fjord in November 1944. She never fired her main guns at a surface target. Not once. The dock she needed had been gone since March 1942. Of the 611 who left Falmouth, 169 were killed. 215 were captured. 5 made it to Spain. 228 came home. Newman received his Victoria Cross in a German prison camp. Some of the captured men heard the explosion from their holding cells. A few felt the pressure wave through the walls. They knew what it meant. The mission succeeded. The dock was destroyed. The strategic calculation was correct, and the withdrawal plan was a known failure from the start. Not bad luck on the night. A failure written into the plan before the ships left Falmouth, documented in the private papers of the man who led it. And the men on the dock knew by 0330 hours that the boats weren't coming. They did the job anyway, not because they didn't understand what was happening, but because they understood it completely and kept moving regardless. 611 individual decisions made somewhere in the Bay of Biscay to keep going after being told the truth. That's not courage in the abstract. That's something quieter and harder. People choosing to do a necessary thing with full knowledge of what it will cost them. Whether the commanders who made that calculation were right probably depends on whether you were one of the 611 or one of the planners. I don't think there's a clean answer. I'm not going to pretend there is. What I know is that Ryder wrote in his private papers that it troubled him, and I think that matters more than the official record around it. Because it means he understood exactly what he was asking, asked it anyway, and carried that weight in the language he chose when nobody was reading over his shoulder. If this is the version of history you want, the one that doesn't clean up the edges or hand you a simple answer, we document one of these every week. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. You can visit Saint-Nazaire today. Active commercial port. The Normandie Dock repaired and returned to service. Ships pass through it. If you ever find yourself in that part of France, and I genuinely encourage you to go, stand at the edge of the dock and look at the caisson. Then turn around and look back at the channel that they came through in the dark. The dock is very large, the channel is very narrow. No 611 men came through that channel on wooden boats, toward a harbor built to kill them, on a ship that was going to explode. Because a dry dock in France was connected by a long chain of consequence to every convoy crossing the Atlantic. And they understood that chain clearly enough to go anyway. Some things don't need explaining,